Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Wages. I am your Python community advocate here at Microsoft, and you are watching the Python Pulse, which streams every second Friday of the month at 11 a.m. Pacific. It is 2 p.m. where I am Eastern Time. I think it's 6 or 7 GMT, time changes. But wherever you're tuning in from, I hope you're seated and ready for a really great stream. Today, I have my friend Pamela Fox on, but before we get her on, I'm going to go through some quick announcements, and then we'll jump into Python web frameworks. All right, so we have our stream notes. If you want to go to the stream notes and follow along with me, you can go to aka.ms/Python Pulse /episode 16. We'll share that. No, I'm also just sharing my code. Let's share the full notes as well. Uno momento. There we go. Gotcha. There we go. Now you can see my stream notes. It's just a GitHub repo. You are able to access the insider's profile that I'm going to show you today. These are how you get all of the settings automatically for Django specifically, but they are a lot of cross settings that help for all Python web development that we've provided for you in VS Code. You can get the insider's profile or the monthly release profile. And then here are some other notes that we have that might help you through the day. We have VS Code Flask tutorial. We have FastAPI on Azure Functions tutorial, all of these things. So these are some quick links that we might be referencing today that'll be helpful. And I'm going to show you my VS Code profile. So this is my VS Code screen. It looks like there's a funky thing happening. Let me reshare this. Better. I don't know why it was giving me issues, but this is my VS Code, and I'll zoom in a little bit more so you all can see. I go down here to my accounts on my left-hand side, my menu, and I can see, and I do my cog for my settings, and I'll go to my profiles. I'm currently in my VS Code day profile. Let's go to my Django profile. There we go. And I want to check out my settings so I can show you all the goodness that I have in here. I can also go by doing Control plus comma, and I'm going to switch to my JSON because that's easier to show. Let's go back to my sample and then show them the JSON. And here are all the settings goodness that I have that are pretty opinionated for the coding that I do. And this will show you some of my Flake 8 arguments, my rough arguments. I use iSort is automatically enabled when I'm using SQL tools. That's helpful, things like that. So you now have access to all of these settings if you go to this go to the settings profile that we have linked. And now let's bring on Pamela and talk about the good stuff. Hi, Pamela.
Hello. Hi. Very happy to be here as always.
You were part of Data Science Day, and you will also be speaking on June 6th.
That's right.
The Flask Day, with a full day web app day.
So June 5th. Well, I know June 4th is when we're starting off the Python Web Apps 101.
Oh, 4th. So sorry, 4th. Okay.
4th. Yeah. So that's part of why we're, talking about this stuff today is to make sure that everybody knows that we are going to be doing a 6-part series of Python web apps. So talking about Flask, FastAPI, Django. You're going to be joining us for Django, containerization, and really going into detail on each of them and, showing you how to run them locally, how to deploy them, all of that stuff. So really going into detail, and that's going to be June 4th through June 20th, Tuesday, Thursdays. And then we're also going to have a version in Spanish. So if anybody speaks Espanol, our colleague Victor Vasquez is going to be doing it in July in Spanish.
I don't think I realized that it was going to be so many days. So you're just devoting your whole June to Python web apps. That's exciting.
Well, it's just each of them is going to be 2 hours. So
That's a lot of days.
past we did
Great.
like a whole, like a, so I mean, it's one of the things you can either spend like your whole day going into it if you want to do it that way, or you can spread it out. So this time we're going to try spreading it out,
I like
doing
that.
2 hours, give you some time to, try stuff out, let stuff sink in. And then, you come back for the next dose.
I like it. Great. Well, thanks for coming. And we have a lot planned for today. So maybe you could tell me a little bit more on what we're going to cover today. And then I'll just like watch along and watch the chat for you and let you know when we have, some time left.
Awesome. Yeah. So today I'm going to just go through Flask, Quart, FastAPI, Django. So these are like the 4 big frameworks that I use. And I'm just going to, spin up a bunch of projects in each of them, both simple projects and more complex projects,
Yeah.
and do some stuff in VS Code with them, run them locally, run the tests, that sort of thing. So we can see the VS Code experience.
Uh-huh.
And so you can get ideas for maybe what kind of frameworks you want to do more with.
So the Developer Survey has mentioned that Flask, FastAPI, and Django are the most popular. I know a little bit about Quart because of you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Quart is?
Quart is the asynchronous version of Flask. So I think a lot of people don't know Quart. It's not like like a name brand or whatever. Like it's not like a household name like Flask. Flask is a household name in our household, at least.
There we go.
So Quart is the asynchronous version of Flask. So if you're already using Flask, then you might want to consider Quart, because it's going to be the easiest thing to port over to. It doesn't show up on, so I brought up the JetBrains developer survey since you mentioned that. So according to this one, actually Django and Flask are basically neck and neck. Yeah, they're basically neck and neck. FastAPI is bringing up the rear, bringing it up fast. It's usually growing each year of year. So let's see. There 2023 is the lighter gray. I have a hard time with the grays, but it is. I have to stop hovering. It is the lighter gray, so you can see that in 2023, it's already jumped from 20% to 25%. So it'll be interesting to see what FastAPI is at next year. I imagine it's going to be even higher. There's a lot of interest in it.
Cool.
All right. So so that's what we're gonna go into. So I'm gonna do almost everything inside GitHub code spaces, just because I'm gonna be opening up so many different projects. And these are all ones that all of you can try as well. And I've already started the code spaces for a bunch of them just to kickstart it so it's a little faster. But these are all public repos, so you can try out everything that I'm trying. So I love
GitHub code spaces just because you can go to, and honestly, I go to your GitHub frequently because you have a very great like README at the front of like all of your projects that you support. And then most of them, I love that. It gives me brain tingles because it's also organized. And then you click it, and then you click the green button, and then you deploy on the web only, and you get to have Azure compute, and you don't have to use any of your own personal compute. You're doing it over the web, which is cool. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm trying to save my poor computer by using code spaces. I'm inflicting it on the code space computers instead. So this is VS Code running inside the browser, but using GitHub compute, which is really like Azure compute, because Microsoft owning GitHub and all that. So here we go. Here's a Flask app, right? So let's just start up this app here. So here we go. It's running. And I just ran this with the command line. Cool. Now we can just reload this like, hey, Python pulse, what up? Okay.
Love it.
And there we go. That reloads. Now, what I want to show you here is that this is like my local host version in the cloud. So it's this GitHub URL, but it's really like a local host on a GitHub machine. So it's super great for for doing development. It's great for teaching, for workshops, that you can do all this inside your browser. And what's really cool is that you can actually go to your ports tab and go to visibility and change port visibility to public. And then that means, in theory, I could actually share this URL and any of you could actually visit the URL.
Nice.
So that's really cool. Once again, it's just like for development, for teaching, for workshops, that sort of thing. You're obviously not going to be hosting on GitHub Codespaces because this is ephemeral, but it's super convenient for quick development, or like if you're just trying out a repo and you don't want to have to like set up the whole repo locally, it's a great way to just try out a repo.
Yeah. I like that link that you can share with maybe like a colleague, say, hey, I made this quick change. Do you like it on the left or the right? Let me know so I can merge it.
That's
Awesome.
right. Yeah. Okay. Now, so then that's going. Now we talked about Quart. So let's just go ahead and convert this to Quart because that was something I wanted to do anyway. And since we've already talked about it, like let's just do that now.
Cool.
So in the requirements right now, we have Flask. I'm just going to change that to Quart. Okay. And then I'll do a pip install -r of the requirements. It's not a very exciting requirements file right now. Okay. We've got it. And then I'm going to go to app.py and I'm just going to replace Flask with Quart. Okay. So
I have a question, maybe like a little bit of a lay one, but like what scenarios is an asynchronous web app going to be more important? I mean, I was doing most of my web dev before asynchronous was really like available and popular in these web frameworks.
Yeah, that's a great.
Pamela Fox's blog post on it. There's always one.
You know me. I always have to have a blog post. So this is my blog post about why concurrency or asynchronous frameworks allow us to have concurrency.
Yep.
So when it's particularly important is if you have really slow IO operations or network operations. So it's really, really important if you're doing anything with like OpenAI calls, because that is a slow network operation. It's going to OpenAI. It's waiting for the OpenAI servers to do some computation. And that's over on the OpenAI servers, right? So our server is just sitting there waiting, doing nothing useful, just waiting, right? And if you're using a synchronous framework like Flask, it's just that thread has to sit there waiting. However, if you move over to an asynchronous framework like Quart or FastAPI or Django with async, then while it's waiting, that process is actually opened up, that worker is actually opened up in order to handle more incoming requests. So we can start doing work on other stuff while it's waiting for the response.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's really important if you have like very slow database calls is also another reson. Because that would also be like basic thing, like, is there another computer that's doing the work? If the other computer is doing the work, then you want to be using async on your computer.
Yep. And so this like prevents timeouts, the timeout issues, or not necessarily?
It wouldn't necessarily prevent timeout issues. How you know you need it is if you like when we realized we needed it is when we did load testing. We used locust.io. That's a great load testing tool for Python. So we used this load testing tool to run a load test against this Flask application that was making all these OpenAI calls. And what we saw was we were getting lots of 500s because there literally was not enough workers, like not enough threads and processes to handle the number of requests coming in. So if you're seeing like you could call like thread starvation, if you're seeing that you just do not have enough workers available. I'm calling it workers because we're using gunicorn, and gunicorn calls it workers is when they have it's like you have a certain number of workers to handle requests. So if you just don't have enough workers, that's because your workers are all tied up just sitting there waiting.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That was great deep dive. I love that. Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. So next thing we want to do is we want to use async. So what we do is we stick async in front of each of these functions. And we'll start with that. There's going to be an error. I'll show you the error. But then we'll fix the error. Okay. And then, now we're using Quart, and let's see, slightly different argument. Okay. So this should do it.
And we also have another question. Is there any risk in using threads instead of async processes to solve these slow processes?
Okay, so I'm not an expert on threads, so I would defer to the G-Unicorn documentation
Okay.
in terms of like best configuration of things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So if you're using threads, I think you still have the issue. I mean, so G-Unicorn like will decide whether to use processes threads depending on how you configure it.
mm-hmm,
But if you're using threads for a network request, you still have the issue that that thread is going to be tied up. I guess maybe what you're saying is that you could use lots and lots of threads.
mm-hmm.
Um, and there, I guess I imagine that there might be a limit to the number of threads you can reasonably have in terms of like memory and stuff like that. But I'm
Okay.
not going to claim to be an expert there. So one thing I would say is, definitely take a look at the G-Unicorn documentation because they talk a lot about like how, kind of best practices for worker configuration.
Yeah.
Where's there? They have some really good reads here about worker configuration. So yeah, I mean, if you're able to make something work with lots and lots of threads, but G-Unicorn has a recommendation for how many workers you do, and it's usually the number of CPU cores times 2 plus 1. That's the number of workers they recommend having.
Mm-hmm.
And if all of those workers, so if you've got like 2 CPU cores, right, so then you end up with 5 workers, and then if you have 5 user requests come in, those 5 workers are waiting for threads. So you
Yep.
might be able to increase the number of workers, but then I think you're gonna maybe have memory constraints. That's what I imagine the issue would be.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Good questions. All right. Okay, so now we're running a Quart app, right? So it's actually pretty
Yeah,
quick
so
to
easy.
port something from Flask to Quart.
Yeah.
And you see it's very similar. So Quart is literally built on Flask. So if you bring in the Quart package, it is going to bring in the Flask package.
Okay.
However, we got an error. I want to show the error because everybody's going to get this when they start dealing with async. And what
Mm-hmm.
you see here is coroutine render template was never awaited.
Uh-huh.
So what this means is that render template in Quartland is actually a function that returns a coroutine. And if it's a function that returns a coroutine, we have to await the result of that coroutine.
Okay.
So we need to go,
Yeah.
we're going to go like this, and we're actually going to put this in parentheses here. So we're going to await the result of this coroutine and
Okay.
then return what comes out of that.
Okay.
So this is I wanted to show it because as you start, dealing with async, it's very common to get errors like that, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you didn't await this thing that needs to be awaited. And sometimes those errors get swallowed too. So you have to like look through and realize that you failed to await something. Because it doesn't always know when it's going to be an issue. So that's like, to me, like the one of the big gotchas of starting to deal with async is, not awaiting when you're supposed to await. And here we go. This is it. So this is now
Yay.
a Quart website. It's going to scale beautifully. Now, this one's not doing much fancy stuff here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did use an await call for rendering template. So if for some reason our template render was like, doing some async calls to a database or something like that, maybe that would help. Where, as I'm saying, where it's really helpful is when you have when you're making, calls to a slow
Mm-hmm.
API or call like slow database calls to a, database on another machine.
Yeah.
So I have, let's see, I've got this one running here. So this is
Mm-hmm.
actually on my local machine. Let me make sure, increase it. And I'll go ahead and run it using the run and debug
Love
in
that.
VS Code.
And we do have some questions. One about Quart being a complete async drop-in replacement for Flask, and I think that's what we're discovering today. That's what we're highlighting. It's really exciting. And then we also have, is G-Unicorn supporting ASCII now, and it used to be WSGI, and it is, right? I think that's what we're
Yeah,
discovering.
great.
Yeah.
Those are both great questions. So Quart attempts to be a drop-in replacement for Flask. Where you're going to have issues potentially is when you're using extensions for Flask. So if you're using an extension like Flask Session, Flask SQL Alchemy, if you're using extensions like that, it's going to vary in terms of whether it works with Quart, because a lot of those extensions assume synchronous functions. What you will find is that there is a bunch of extensions that have been ported using Quart extensions. So there are a bunch of sessions that have been quarted. Like I actually used Quart session the other day. It is not one for one with Flask session. So for example, it doesn't support the file system option. However, it was good enough for me. I'm going to use it with Redis, right? So for basic Flask, yeah, you pretty much, if you can do it in Flask, you should be able to do it in Quart. But many people, when they're using Flask, they actually mean they're using Flask plus 10 different extensions, right? And these are all extensions that are like from the community and, have different levels of support. And, there is a Quart community as well. And you can see lots of extensions here. But that's really what's going to determine whether it's easy for you to move over to Quart or whether it's going to be hard.
Interesting. Okay, great. And then we also have, so we did.
And it's G-Unicorn supporting ASCII now. Yeah. So that was a great question. So what you're going to want for G-Unicorn, let me see if I've got it in, let me just search for G-Unicorn here. Oh, okay. All right. So for G-Unicorn, what we usually do, let me search for it over here to show you what command we use. It would be entry, unicorn dot work. There we go. Okay, great. Okay, so this is our G-Unicorn configuration for a Quart application, and this is according to best practices. So we've put this G-Unicorn configuration as a gunicorn.conf.py. And that's one way you can configure. You can also configure these with the command line, but I like putting it in a gunicorn.conf.py because then you can actually unit test it. So I have unit tests for my gunicorn.conf to make sure it's a valid G-Unicorn configuration. So these are, basically, variables that G-Unicorn looks for in this file. And this is using the best practices. This is for deployment on Azure. So we have done a little bit of special coding here. Where we're figuring out the right number of workers. So generally this is number of workers. And then in terms of supporting ASCII, what you can do is use G-Unicorn with the Unicorn worker class. So that is how you can use G-Unicorn with an ASCII application, is by using the Unicorn worker class. Now, there was also a comment, that can't you just use Unicorn directly? Yeah, you could also just use Unicorn directly. And there's honestly like a bit of like discussion or debate about when you should use G-Unicorn with Unicorn versus when you should use just Unicorn itself. The FastAPI documentation does have several articles discussing that. So it just depends on how you're running your Docker containers as to whether you should use G-Unicorn with Unicorn or whether you should use Unicorn directly.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. We have about FastAPI that we may be getting into this question a little bit later because we wanted to talk about FastAPI too.
Yeah. So here, let me just do a quick, just show that we've got a Quart app running. And this is the kind of example where we're really going to benefit from doing the async, because we're doing multiple asynchronous calls. So this is a RAG chat application, which gets information from my blog. As you say, I like to blog, right? Right now it thinks I work at Khan Academy, so it doesn't always get everything right. But that was based off some, blog posts it found, right? And this one it's really good that we're using async for it, because we have an async call to the search API. We have an async call. We have 2 async calls to OpenAI, right? So we have multiple async calls. And so by using the, Quart, we're able to have concurrency and be able to handle much more requests than if we were using Flask.
Awesome.
All right. Okay. So yeah, we should move to FastAPI. That's the impression I'm getting, because that was kind of a lead in for FastAPI. So let's go ahead and go to FastAPI, because we were getting questions about that. Yeah. Should you just use FastAPI? Great question. Yeah. So I would recommend that if you're starting from scratch, FastAPI is a great fit, especially if you're doing something API driven, right? FastAPI was built for APIs, right? And it's very, very well tuned for that. You can use FastAPI to do a whole website, and I have done that multiple times, like with the front end as well. But where it really, shines is when you're doing the API for something. So we'll see that soon. The reason I want to make sure people know about Quart is that if you already have a Flask application, you might find it easier to go from Flask to Quart than to go from Flask to FastAPI. And the important thing is just I want people to know like that, what the paths are for moving to async, because I think increasingly we're going to be wanting to be using more of these async frameworks.
We do have a question about what we might be covering today, directory structure in Flask or Django. I mean, I love that the command line just kind of spits out directory structure for us when we start, but will we be talking a little bit more about that in this?
Yeah, those are good questions. So directory structure is actually hard to get right. Django is very opinionated, so I actually think like that's usually fairly straightforward because there's only so many ways you can do that directory structure. Because Django's like, oh, you have to have like this with the URLs, models, views. FastAPI and Flask are not as opinionated, so it can be I actually think it can be very tricky to come up with the right directory structure. So I'm not going to dwell on it today. That's something we can talk about in the workshops. But if you are looking for example directory structures, once again, take a look at all my examples here, because I've tried to come up with directory structures, especially for the ones using like databases that are a little more complex. I've tried to come up with directory structures that are more kind of scalable than your hello world, right? Because that's the one thing with Flask and FastAPI is that once your app starts getting bigger and bigger, it can be harder to figure out how to organize it. So I try to use the app factory pattern and to use blueprints or routers in FastAPI land, right? So we call them blueprints in Flask, we call them routers in FastAPI, but both that and the app factory pattern can allow you to have more organized code, like more modular code bases.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. Okay, so now we're in a FastAPI app, right? So let's see, we can like look at, right? So this is our FastAPI app. So here you can see we're using async. And this is just, very simple function. So it looks very similar to Quart, right? We make an app and we have async. So let's go ahead and hello.
Doc is excited about FastAPI.
I know he's just so into it. So what I wanted to show actually is that FastAPI now has a development server built in. So I just wanted to show that for those of you using FastAPI in the very latest version of FastAPI. So you have to, update. There is a development server. In the past, we've had to use Unicorn, and you can still totally use Unicorn, but Sebastian is trying to make it the new developer experience easier. And so he's built in a development server, and it like actually you can see how it like tries to find. It's really cute. It tries to find your FastAPI app. If you try and point it in the right direction, it'll try to find the FastAPI app in it. So here we go. So I'm using the FastAPI CLI, and we get the not found, of course, because the documentation is at /docs. So, the reason why do people love FastAPI? Well, these docs are so fun, and these docs are generated using a different package, the OpenAPI Swagger package. But FastAPI just makes it really easy to use, right? So this is a baby name generator, right? So we can go here and we can issue the request.
What is it returning? Nina. Okay.
Nina. Yeah. I added your name to it earlier today, although it's hard because it's random to get it.
Derek, I like it.
So if you are using FastAPI, keep in mind now there is a dev CLI built in. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the run and debug. Right. So this is if, when you're in VS Code, you want to make sure you've got a good configurations in your launch.json so that you can always use a debugger. It's very important, whatever you're doing, being able to use a debugger. I know that lots of us, just resort to print statements, but it is so, so nice when you actually can use a debugger. So I try to force myself to make sure that I am able to use a debugger. And the easiest way to do that in VS Code is to put configurations in your launch.json. So here you can see this is the configuration for the app itself. So now I'm running this in debug mode.
In your VS Code, could I see your drop-down menu? I want to see if on that one. So you have a Python app. So sometimes I go through this method UI to add a configuration.
Mhm.
And then you can also have, it'll open up the command palette. We don't have to go through it right now, but it'll open up the command palette and you can pick, yeah, exactly like that. It'll do it with the, yep. And I'll do, I usually use Flask or Django. I've not played with the FastAPI one, but that's
Yeah.
very cool. So there's some things that come
Yeah.
with that.
I think that's basically what I did because I just did it and it looks pretty much the same.
Very close. Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're not sure where to start, do this add configuration. There's also this button here, and there are defaults for Flask, FastAPI, and Django. And then if you need to, you can customize them. But that's pretty much the default here. And then I also added configuration for tests.
We do have a question on printing console logs and things. I do love my print when I get into a sticky situation, but actually we have really cool functionality in VS Code for breakpoints and for identifying the variables at any of those breakpoints. So I really like the VS Code debugger. Try it
Yeah,
out. You can use
let's
both.
try it out. Okay, so we're going to add Don's name. Okay, and what you see is that my run and debug does have reload on. So this app has reloaded. And so if I go here and I say like starts with D, execute. Now I got Dixie, once again, randomness.
Okay.
But if I want to make sure it's working, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to here, main.py, right? I'm going to set a breakpoint. And then I am going to execute it again. And hopefully it has stopped at the breakpoint. Yes, it has. Okay. So here, what we can see is we can see the locals and the globals. So the local right now is just that starts with D. So it got the right starts with letter. And then it starts with all the name choices, and then it narrows it down using a list comprehension. So it says, okay, just give me the subset of names that starts with that letter D. And so what I'm going to do is see like, oh, name choices. Look, we can see right there. I don't know if you can see it, but your name is first in the list for that comprehension. And we could even like, so you can put watch expressions here. So if you want to say like, you can even put like, you can put any valid Python expression here. So you can be like, is Dawn in name choices? True. It is. So good. So, my name, my name change worked. Now as to what the random name is going to be, it's probably not going to be Dawn. It's Dita in this case. But now I have confidence that, that data change did work because I'm seeing Dawn in that list.
Cool.
And then I can just play till the end and it'll execute. So that's really helpful. So I do recommend being able to use that. And then you can also debug your tests that way as well, right? So you can see I also have a configuration for tests here. And this one, so this one's specific for tests, and I do have this no cub option. So if you do use the coverage library, you probably want to turn it off for your tests because for debugging, because the debugger and the coverage library hook in the same way. So you can't really do coverage and test debugging at the same time.
Interesting. I haven't run into that one yet. Okay, great. Good tip.
Yeah, let's just see. Okay, so here's our test. So I went over the test tab and I'll just refresh so you can see that, yeah, it auto-discovered the test and I actually already ran them. And here you can see my GUnicorn test. I was mentioning that I do, I do like to actually test my gunicorn.config. So this tests it to make sure it works. And then I got my, my API test here. Oh, and I've already got a breakpoint here. So I should be able to go here, and there's two ways to run and debug it, right? Well, first we'll just run it just normal, okay? So we can run all the tests, or we can run just a particular test. Oh, and look, now we've actually got an error, probably because I added a new name to it, and that throws off the test data, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and delete your name, sorry. And we'll go ahead and run it again. Okay, and then this time, this one is back to working. So that's just running it normally. Okay. But I can also run in debug mode. So I'm going to go here, click debug test, and if all goes well, ta-da, we are in the debugger. And now we can step through the test.
Yep.
And be like, do. Oh, and it's even going into the here. I love it. I wasn't sure it was going to do that. Here we go. All right. And it went through there. So that's really helpful. I particularly find it helpful for tests if I'm really not sure what I should be asserting, because I can't remember like what the return type looks like. And I'm like, oh, what is even in, what's even in, in a response? I can't remember. Right. So I might like actually put the breakpoint there. Let me do it there. Right. Especially when I'm using like a new library, right? Because as you see, like I alternate between FastAPI and Flask and Django and Quart and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I can't remember exactly what's in each of these. So here we can look at response, right? And I'm like trying to figure out like, oh, okay, there's response.encoding, there's response.headers.
I love just poking around with new stuff. That's great.
Yeah, so there we go. So once again, I recommend going through the effort to add configurations to the launch.json. You'll be happy in the future, and other people will be happy for you as well. Okay, and let's show one more FastAPI while we're FastAPIing. Let's see. So this one I wanted to show because this one I'm doing what's called a compound configuration. I don't know if you've played with these at all.
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, so it's very cool because you can run 2 debug configurations at the same time. And this is super helpful if you are doing, full stack. If you have a React front end or a lit front end, whatever, like you have some sort of JavaScript front end, and then you have a Python backend, right?
Oh, I always do it like one at a time. And I can't even remember the last time I've done headless Django in a while. But yes, cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. So there we go. So now, and I'm trying to add this to more of my apps now because it's so much nicer. So you can see like the backend is doing something similar to what we just saw. We're using Unicorn to launch FastAPI. It already launched it, but it's very eager. So it opens up both of the so here's our backend. Our backend's a FastAPI backend, and then our front end is a React app.
Okay, cool.
Let's see. So let's try the backend. So this is another RAG application. This one's a RAG for like an online store. Cool. Here you can see like product chat, right? Like best shoe for hiking. So we can test, we could test it from the backend and say like, okay, let's say the user best shoe for hiking. And so here we're passing in a JSON. This is what it looks like with the FastAPI docs. We pass in a JSON. And this is a little slow because we're doing some LLM calls here. We're doing a Postgres database lookup as well. Let's do the same one over here.
How do you have your Postgres set up? How do you have your Postgres set up for this application?
Oh, yes. Love it. As always, I have it in my dev container because, I like to put everything in the dev container. So my Postgres is running inside this container because of this Docker Compose, and I'm actually using the PG vector image specifically. So this is it has the Postgres base image, and then it has the PG vector extension installed in it. So that way I can do
coming from Postgres, right? That's a new, or is that coming from Azure or for Postgres?
PG vector is an open source extension, so it's coming from like the Postgres community, right?
Okay.
So here, this is their GitHub organization.
Oh.
It's this guy here, Andrew Kane, just does everything in PG vector, it seems. So very productive. I'm happy to see all his commits. And so this is the extension for Postgres that lets you store vectors and then do queries with them. And this is what lots of people are interested in right now because it's an easier way of searching things.
I don't know if this is like hot off the press, but I've seen posts that Postgres now has its own vector database. Have you seen that yet?
Well, does Postgres have? I mean, is it PG vector? In that case,
PG vector. I think it was coming from the Postgres team. I don't know. I'll send it in the chat if I find it.
Yeah. Because I've been playing around with a lot. Yeah, and I've got ones that like deploy to where is it? Oh, I don't even have. I should add more of my links on here. So yeah, if you go, I think they're probably talking about this because also if you go to here, hosted providers, this is an issue thread which like tracks all of the cloud hosting providers that have support for PG Vector.
All right.
So lots of folks are adding support for PG Vector because it's just the standard way of adding vector support for Postgres now. So it's probably what they're talking about.
Yeah, this is PG Vector. You're right. Okay, cool. Perfect. Yay. And
Right,
you mentioned by name in this article. Okay.
So there we go. Okay, so FastAPI. I saw a question about testing the front end actually. So let's go to let's see, we can do that with Django, we can do it with FastAPI. Doesn't bother me. Do I even unit test? Of course I do. So let's do that for our next one. So let's do it with Django.
You came from the JavaScript world before. You came from the JavaScript world before. Yay.
Yeah. I'm basically a full stack developer. Like I'm in Python now because Python's pretty cool, but I was, very heavy in JavaScript, but I've always actually done front and back. So
yeah.
I'm not, I don't have strong allegiances on either side. I just want to make things for people to use that people like.
A very, very cool career. Okay, cool.
All right, so let's set up a Django plus Postgres.
Cool.
And so this is going to use similar setup with Postgres in the dev container so that we can, work with it locally. Mm-hmm. And this is going to have tests for the front end, and the tests are going to be with Playwright. And we've talked about Playwright before.
Yeah.
So Playwright is a way to do end-to-end testing. So
actually, shout out to your previous episode because you came over here. So in this channel, you'll find a playlist called Python Pulse. Pamela talked about Playwright before.
Yeah. So that was so we did a whole thing on Playwright, didn't we? Okay, I forgot, but here we go. Okay, so let's get this Django one started up here. So opening the project.
I also didn't mean to cut you off at the head. You could go to Playwright more too, but I was just saying there's more content. You want a full hour on it.
Let's see. All right. Run server. Is this going to work here? Okay, there we go. This is a space tourism website. Which will be the future after AI. So
tomorrow.
Okay, so this is with Django. All right. And let's just go to our testing tab since we want to.
Good. And then we've met the requirement as well. We've hit the FastAPI, we've hit the Quart, we've hit the Flask, and we're in the Django. So we're hitting the full marks on a live stream. That's great.
There we go. Yeah. Just do a little bit of everything. So let's open up this test Playwright. So this is using the Python Playwright package. There's also a JavaScript Playwright package. So if it makes more sense for your development team to write the Playwright test in JavaScript, then you could totally write them in JavaScript, but you can also write them in Python. So it's, whatever works for you, because these are end-to-end tests. So they're literally opening up a headless browser, doing some action, seeing if it worked, and then, if it didn't, then get an error. So you can write it really in any language because you're really just orchestrating a browser. Like, here you go, browser, do all this stuff.
We have a question about LangChain. I'm showing it because you do some stuff with that, and we also have our last episode with Marlene last month was about LangChain as well. So that's a little plug. But do you want to answer this question a little bit more?
I have used LangChain a little bit, but Marlene has really used it more and is a contributor to LangChain now. So, I've got the basics of LangChain, and I've dug into a few things of it, but I tend to use just the straight OpenAI SDK. I try to do really basic examples when I'm teaching, about LLMs. This is a very super basic LangChain example here. But for my personal use, I tend to just use the OpenAI SDK. So I recommend Marlene's episode because Marlene has really been digging more into LangChain.
Cool.
All right, so let's see what we're doing. Oh, we were starting up some Playwright. Okay,
Mhm.
so here we go. We've got some tests, and they are currently, it looks like they're passing, but let's run them to make sure, and then we'll just try to break them.
I love it.
Let's see. And this is, now I will say that Playwright tests, they can be a little bit, there's definitely going to be slower than like your standard like PyTest, just testing against like a mock client, because it is literally opening up a browser, right? And there's only so fast you can do that. So you can see them going along here. They're doing this all in a headless Chromium browser. And they're running actually quite a few tests. This doesn't look like a lot of tests, but we parameterize them using PyTest parameterization. So it's actually doing quite a few tests.
And if you want to see it working, there's also a flag that you can say like show browser or open browser.
Yeah, you can do that. Then it'll be really, really slow.
Yes.
But okay, so it looks like they're all they all passed. Okay, everything's done. 27 passed. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'll just break it. All right, so like this one expects page to have title. Let's see, expand. Okay, so that's in the base of that. Expand. Let's do the wrong your. Okay, and let's see. I'll do that here too because I'm not sure which one. Okay, and then let's just run. Let's go to this one again. Okay, and let's just run this one.
Okay.
Let's see. Dun, dun, dun.
And just to highlight this, how easy you just hit play on the test in the well of VS Code, which was
All right. So it says, so it's an unexpected value. So you can see that this failed. Now at this point, I haven't tried doing this with the runner, so I'll just show how I would do this just manually. So let's see. So the test is local. I'll just do it -k test home.
And -k does singular test.
Yeah, well, it does like a keyword search. So
Okay.
I just use it as a shortcut for it. I just give the name of the test. And then what I'm going to do is remember how to tracing equals retain on failure. Okay. All right, because I want to show tracing. It's always so fun to show Playwright. So it's like we always have to show it because it's so fun. All right. So let's see if this will work.
I'm not trying to retain on failure.
So that what I'm telling it is, let me make this bigger. I'm telling it that if there is a failure, I want it to retain the trace so that then I can check out the trace. So what I should see now is, let's see, where did I put the trace? Test results. Okay. See this trace.zip? Now I have to figure out how to get it out of code spaces. Okay. I'm going to click download. All right. And then I'm going to go to trace.playwright.dev. And I am going to open up, bring in that trace file. There we go. Okay, this is so cool. So you actually can just go through it and see what happens. You're like, okay, it went to the page, it went there, and then it failed on this. And so then you could actually look to see like, okay, well, why did it fail? Like, what was the actual title? In this case, we're looking at the browser title, which you can't see. You can't see that in the trace. But normally it's like you're testing something on the page and you can see like, oh, okay, the page didn't have what I expect. So it's really cool to actually like, you can click through each thing that happened in the test. And see the point where it failed. So really, really fun.
And that'd be cool if you're doing like user interaction. So go to this page, find this form, fill in this form field, click send.
We could do, let's do a more complicated one. So we could also just do tracing equals on, and then I can do I can do a more complicated one. So we do like test Playwright.
I didn't know there was a retain on failure, so I like that. That's cool.
Okay, so we got. Did we ever do I don't know if we tested our form yet, because that would actually request information. Yeah, we didn't check that one. Let me see if I've got it running over in my Quart demo, because we do this for We also test our Quart applications. I mean, the thing with Playwright is you can test anything with it, right? As long as you can make a website, and you can also use it for smoke tests. So we use it in our GitHub actions. So, we deploy it, and then we run some of our Playwright tests against the actual deployed URL to make sure that it's passing on the deployed URL.
Cool. Very cool.
Okay, so let's see.
And the only way to do that is GitHub Actions? Well, not only way, but that's the best way to kind of approach that?
I mean, generally, if you want to do smoke tests, it needs to be part of your deployment. So our deployment we're doing on GitHub Actions. If you're doing your deployment with some other mechanisms, like at Khan Academy, our deployment would have been in Slack. We did our deployment in Slack. So if you're doing your deployment in Slack, then you would have like a Slack bot that that kicked off the test, right? So you just want to smoke test should be something that you kick off after or as part of a deployment to check to see that nothing's on fire, as it is. It looks like I haven't installed all this stuff. Okay. So that's what you'd want to do, is just connect it to your deploy somehow. Okay, I didn't set up that environment. Okay, now it's installing Playwright. That can be a little bit slow. Okay. So we can also do trace and equals on. But yeah, now we're just getting the Playwright. So let's see. Are there other things we want to talk about with FastAPI, Flask, or Django with VS Code?
I'd love to do more on Postgres and how you set your databases up. Because I know we can go pretty deep on that, and that'd be fun.
Yeah, actually, I was going to show that in yet a different one.
What do you have for your database on the Flask FastAPI and the Flask ones? I know we were doing Postgres on the Django one. Okay, so that one's Postgres.
I'm like a Postgres addict. I pretty much will use Postgres for everything. We do have an example where we use Mongo and use a local Mongo image. So certainly you can, I love things where I can set it up, inside the container. So I really like Postgres for a SQL database. I've also done a little bit of Mongo, but I always reach for Postgres. It's a great database, great community. And I found it to be fairly straightforward to set up. So this one I wanted to show the SQL Tools extension, because we haven't shown that yet today, and we always like to show the SQL Tools extension. It's so cool. The only shame is that sometimes GitHub Codespaces has this bug where you can't see the icons. Luckily, I've memorized the locations of the icons. Oh, they're here. Oh, great. Okay.
Just locations this time.
Sometimes I'm literally just clicking on invisible things, and it's okay because I remember how. Okay, so let's see. Let's do run and debug for this one, so you can see what this is. So my general goal is to have run and debug to be able to, for every single, thing I'm working on, I should be able to run it in debug mode, and then also should be able to run the test in debug mode. I think if you can get to that, then you'll be in a good state. Because the thing is, once you have a bug, you're so depressed that you don't want to go through the effort to make a launch.json. You have to make these configurations when you're not depressed.
Yes, that's so true. Very fair.
That's my tip. Okay, so here we have this Python quiz, right?
Okay.
We have some great questions here. Now, what we're going to do is add another question. So we're going to go to SQL Tools, and SQL Tools is running on that local Postgres. So you can see the local Postgres here, 5432. That's the default Postgres port. Let me make it bigger. And we can connect to that in our SQL Tools. And you'll see in my dev container.json, I've got the SQL Tools connection already set up. So as soon as I start
a little bit more in your dev containers.json and dev containers in generally, I don't know if we did a little bit of a primer on that.
Right. Yeah. So dev containers are a way of setting up containerized development environments that are associated with your GitHub repo. And we recommend just putting dev container definitions in all your repos. And so that if somebody wants to use a dev container either in GitHub Codespaces or in VS Code locally, then when they have that option and everything will be set up. So with the dev container, you can customize just so much. You can customize the editor, right? These are all VS Code customizations here. Other editors are trying to add support for dev containers as well. But I usually just have the VS Code customizations. You can specify, the Docker container you're using and even the Docker Compose. So here I'm using a Docker Compose that has both, the app, the app code. This is going to be the app code.
Yeah.
And then this is the actual database.
And it's built on top of the Docker container functionality. All of that knowledge is transferable, but you can also move into the explicit declarative definitions on building it through your dev container.json.
Yeah. So you can really you can start simple with your dev containers, and then you can just add more and more so that just the developer doesn't have to do setup. And I love these because I hate setting things up. So once if I get the dev container figured out, then I'm just good to go forever. And I don't have to remember, how do I set up a Postgres port? How do I make sure it has the right database in it? What's the connection? How do I connect to it? Right. So
I just copied from previous projects or your project.
Yeah, it's super helpful.
Cool.
So in the dev container, I've got that SQL tools connection to the local database. And so here is SQL tools over here. So we're just going to go into there and take a look at the questions. And what we see is these are the questions. Oh no, now you can see the answer. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say generate insert query. Okay. And so now this is from SQL tools. It just, it's, giving me example to start off for making an insert query. So I'm going to add a new question. So what question should we ask about Python?
What's the next Python version?
Who is the PSF chair? There's only one chair, right? It's you.
Yeah, there's only one chair.
I'm always like you don't show that off much. Like there's only one chair. It's you.
And I don't talk about it that enough. So apparently people realized that I was a chair / president recently, and I'm like, well, it's almost over.
Yeah. And there we go. All right. So I think this is the syntax for this.
Chewy. Shout out to Sarah's dog.
I guess I couldn't remember the name of your dog. I'm sorry. What's the name of your dog?
I have Theo and Rocky, but it's okay. I love Chewy. Every time Chewy gets on the backgrounds of the call, it's awesome. And Sarah is one of our colleagues, Sarah Kaiser, who's just so great, and she has some episodes on Python Pulse as well. So check those out.
Yeah, Sarah's great. Chewy's often on them. All right, so we did the insert, and now we're gonna do a refresh of this one, and we can see who is a PSF chair, and then we can go over here and reload this page, and here we see who is a PSF chair. So now we can do this quiz. All right, so first we need to know who invented Python.
Chat. Me.
I realize there's a delay in the chat, so it's hard to do. It's hard to do an actual interactive quiz. We'll do all right. I'll read all the questions out and then just stick them randomly in the chat. What is the name of the Python package installer? Is it pip, py, package, or install? What was Python named after? Was it a type of snake? Monty Python, the comedy group? Python, the philosopher? Or Ford Python, a race car?
Okay.
Which is very fast. Oh, which we should talk about. Our Python, this is the original.
Oh, yes! We're going to have stickers.
Faster Python. We're making stickers of this, a colored version of it. This is a fast Python for 3.13. Look at that.
We are so hyped. We're getting them printed. So you have to find one of us at various conferences, and we'll all have them. It's zoomed across the page. Okay, we're running out.
Wait. Oh, yeah. Okay, let's just do it. All right, Monty Python. When was it invented? That's the hardest one. And then who's the chair? Submit my score. 80%. Dang. When was it actually invented? 60%. It's getting worse. Oh, I forgot to say who invented it. There we go.
There you go.
All right, that's it. Thank you everyone for joining. You can find the repos in the show notes and in my profile, and we hope to see you at the Python Web Apps 101 series if you want to dive more into any of these.
So I think my URL link only does one of them, but I'll put it in the chat. It's because I was focused on the one that I'm joining. I forgot that you were doing so much, but it's http and I'll fix it. So it has a aka.ms/python -web -apps -2024.
It just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
So you can find it linked from my
chat.
GitHub profile. There we go.
Oh,
There we go.
So prepared. All right. Thanks everybody for joining another episode of the Python Pulse, a Microsoft podcast. Thank you to our producer, Peggy, who is behind the scenes and makes everything go smoothly. If there are any hiccups, it is my fault. She is pivotal in getting this stream aired every month. If you just stumbled upon a stream, you can join us on Twitch or YouTube. On YouTube is kind of our primary destination on the VS Code YouTube channel. Please leave us a comment. Like, subscribe. VS Code YouTube channel has tons of great things. You can also see Data Science Day, which Pamela Fox was also a part of, and there's a whole playlist on that. So that was great. And you can join us on the Python Discord at aka.ms/python-discord. And that's where we hang out and we chat all things snakes. So it's been a great episode. Chat with you all next month. Bye, y'all.
Bye.